Sex is good, but only within a container. Now, God created sex for the sake of physical and sexual intimacy, as well as procreation, but with marriage as the boundary. Now, sex is good and sex is needed. Sex is required for healthy marriages to build intimacy and connection. Sex in itself is beyond the physical. It goes as far as building mental, emotional, and psychological connections between both partners. In fact, sex creates soul ties, one that was never meant to be broken, that is. In fact, during sex, body fluids are exchanged. But more than that, it's the joining of two souls as one. What sex does is, sex builds connections between two people. Aside from joining in holy matrimony between two people as one, sex officially, biblically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically joins two people together as one. The vows exchanged are the proclamation. Sex does the act of joining and putting two people together, which is why Genesis chapter 2 verses 24 says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." The cleaving of a husband and wife together as one is sealed through sex. Make no mistake about it, brethren, it is good to have sexual relations, but only within the confines of marriage. Now, marriage is the boundary that God created for sex and for sexual relations between two partners of the opposite sex. And just like every other thing that crosses boundaries and becomes dangerous, so is sex. Sex outside the boundary of marriage that God creates. Marriage provides the protection needed for sex. It is strong enough to handle the sexual desires and the passions of the individuals involved, as well as the strong emotional, mental, and spiritual and psychological connections that will be built by sex. Sex is more than the physical exchange of bodily fluids between partners. Now, let's talk a little about fornication. Fornication is having sex before marriage. Now, this is bad because if you have multiple sexual partners before marriage, you will only be left with broken pieces of you, having soul ties with different people. In fact, your spouse will never get the real you, the whole you, the innocent you, the complete you, because all you have left to offer are the broken pieces of you from the previous sexual encounters. Sex before marriage has far worse consequences than being at risk of infections from sexually transmitted diseases or unwanted pregnancies. Sex before marriage tears your soul apart, leaving you incomplete. Most people who engage in such promiscuous acts say they do that because they're trying to fill a void. I don't know if this sounds familiar. Now, the void in question can only be filled by God in your season of singleness. Looking for a fill somewhere else will mean you giving your body to different sexual partners who never actually fills this void. In fact, what it does is it leaves you emptier than before. The dangerous effect it has on an individual, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and spiritually, are not relegated to a particular gender. When you have sex with someone who is not your marriage partner, especially if the person is the worst option for you, what happens is you both deposit a piece of you inside each other. And sex is more than the physical exchange of body fluids. It is the creation of an emotional connection. It's the formation of bonds and soul ties that, if broken, will leave the people involved in shambles. Sex outside marriage, that is, a married person is having sex with someone that is not his or her spouse. It not only breaks the marriage and the trust between partners, but it also defiles the marriage. It defiles the marriage bed and it breaks the family altar. It goes against the instruction of God in Hebrews chapter 13 verses 4, which says, "Honor marriage and guard the sacredness of sexual intimacy between wife and husband." God draws a firm line against casual and illicit sex. In fact, sex outside marriage destroys the trust, the peace, and the sacredness of the home. It breaks the connection between partners. It gives the devil more room to come in and cause havoc. Note that sex outside marriage is not caused by temptation from the devil, but rather by an intentional decision of the defiling partner to ruin the marriage by giving in to lust. James chapter 1 verses 14 says, "Temptation comes from our desires, which entice us and drag us away." So sex outside marriage takes away the love from the home. In fact, it's even worse when children are involved because it distorts their mentality of marriage, respect, love, and sex. It also starts the trauma of childhood dysfunction, producing toxic children and adults from broken homes, and the cycle of toxic family patterns goes on and on. Sex outside the boundary of marriage which God created, whether before marriage or inside marriage, has more disastrous effects than we know or even imagine. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verses 2 to 3, it gives the perfect instruction from God concerning sex and marriage, and why sex must remain holy and why it must remain only within the confines of marriage. It says, "Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder." Just like water in a container, water is good, controlled, and made available for good use, whether domestic or commercial, just for the benefit of man. However, the same water outside of a container is dangerous. So no matter how little or big it is, a little spill can cause a fall which is dangerous and can lead to various health complications. A huge spill can lead to floods, damaging homes, lives, and properties. But the object is still the same. But just like water outside the container and boundary of marriage, sex is dangerous. It has no control and is not fit for no good use. Outside of marriage, whether before marriage or while married, sex cannot be beneficial to everyone no matter how high the ecstasy of the moment is or becomes. In fact, God designed sex for more than just procreation and birthing babies. While that's the physical result of having sex, a whole book in the Bible, the Songs of Solomon, was dedicated to explaining and speaking on the physical intimacy between partners in marriage through sex. Sex is a way of showing submission to your partner in marriage. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verses 3 to 5 says, "The husband shall fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. So do not deprive each other." So sex is a way of showing humility, love, respect, and regard for your partner in marriages. Sex is a way of giving service to your partner in the way that God intended. In fact, sex is more about making sure that your partner is sexually satisfied than it is about getting your satisfaction. Sex in marriage refrains you from falling into temptation of your lust. And that is why Apostle Paul advised in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verses 9. But if they can't manage their desires and emotions, they should by all means go ahead and get married. The difficulties of marriage are preferable by far to a sexually tortured life as a single. So God wants you to have sex. He wants you to have sex to build connections and companionships, to share physical intimacy with the opposite sex, to build compatibility, trust, and a safe space to be vulnerable, but only within marriage. Now, God creates the laws of sex and marriage for our good. And the effects of sex can only be contained and properly nurtured and controlled within the confines of marriage. So marriage is the container that God created for sex for our good. When He created sex, He knew that sex was much more than one person could handle alone, and it was far worse if people had it with multiple sexual partners. And that's why He created the boundary of marriage. Now, sex outside of marriage is not only a disservice to your marriage, but it's also a disservice to yourself, because you've sinned against your own body. And sex outside marriage is disrespect and it's disregard to your partner, not honoring your matrimonial bed or soon-to-be matrimonial bed. It is a dishonor to your marriage altar and to the sacredness of what God had designed marriage to be: a home and a safe space for individuals. Most importantly, it is disobedience to God, breaking His rules as well as disrespecting His boundaries. I pray that we all will live a sexually pure life. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.